Hello, everyone. My name is Null. Oh, sorry. My name is Kody, and I am the host of both Null Byte and the Security Forward show. And today we are coming for another crossover episode with our co-host, Killian. Killian, thank you for joining us today.
Kody, thanks for having me on again. This has turned into a real thing. Last week, this week, this is exciting.
Yeah, I think that the hacker community definitely gave you a good reception last time, so I wanted to bring you back again to talk about another topic we've gotten a lot of questions about. And again, we are fully live today, so I've already seen the arguments going on in the chat about like Kali versus Windows versus Parrot. We just want to say, of course, we use the original best operating system for hacking. We just use Temple OS. So, you know, if you want our opinion, there you go. So anyway, if you guys have a question in the chat, please make sure to post it. We will try to get to it as we can. If we don't get to it immediately, it's probably because we're talking about something and don't want to interrupt it just to, you know, answer, I don't know, like what is this computer? But if you have a question, please make sure to ask it because we will try to answer it while we are live today. And if you like this, make sure to subscribe to both channels, both Null Byte and the Security Forward channel. We do live streams like this, oh my gosh, like 4 times a week now. So you can check that out if you want to see more of us every week and answer, get some more of your questions answered. So thank you to everybody in the chat. It is super lively in here. It is great to see everyone has showed up for another one of our really exciting demos. So Killian, can you tell us a little bit about what we're going to be looking at today? Because if I recall, it has something to do with ransomware.
It does. Well, first off, I just want to say also, you know, thank you again for having me on, and I really appreciate the reception from the community that watches. You know, we saw the comments, and I really appreciate that. So thank you for inviting me. I know Kody, you know, you and I have talked about this, how the hacker community is very tight knit and very welcoming, and I definitely feel that. So thank you, everybody out there, for that. It makes me feel good. Appreciate it. But today, to get back on topic, you know, we had covered, and you know, some eagle-eyed viewers will notice this. We had covered some bypassing endpoint controls and things like that, and we had mentioned that's often the beginning of a different type of attack. So a much larger APT campaign or even a ransomware campaign. So we thought it would be great to show kind of the follow-up or the conclusion on that. So taking you from that compromised Word document and showing you how it can build throughout the process. So from that point of infection, learning about the environment, potentially moving laterally, mapping things out, finding data that I want to steal, elevating my credentials, then finding data I want to steal, and of course, getting that out of the organization and detonating ransomware to cover my tracks. And this is a very common scenario we've seen in a lot of these major threats, you know, the Emotet, the Maze, and a lot of these APT groups is, you know, the ransomware is a smokescreen almost anymore.
So for total lay people, what we're going to be showing today is basically, last time we showed how we can build a document very simply with like this much code that will bypass like antivirus, it will bypass the ability to detect something malicious is going on and let you do something on the computer. Maybe something bad, maybe something really bad. But today, we're going to go through the process of showing all the way through the attack chain, what happens once you've been breached, all the way up to ransomware. So ransomware, of course, is probably the worst case scenario for a lot of organizations or even individuals that have important data. Everybody has data they need for their work, whether you're a photographer, whether you're running a hospital, whether you're running a school. Like this data is really, really important. So once an employee clicks on a file they shouldn't and maybe enables a macro to run, well, then what happens? You know, like what is the chain of actually getting to the point that somebody could own not just that one computer, but the whole network? And really, that's kind of the missing link that we're going to be showing you guys today. When somebody breaks into you know, a single computer, how does that person get to the point where they're breaching a whole company or ransomwaring, you know, potentially millions and millions of dollars worth of data that is absolutely critical to an organization running? And again, this is things like schools, this is things like small government, this is things even like you know, the Sony attack where they lost so many files that they didn't know who to pay. Like there are real companies that have been impacted in the past by these sorts of attacks and that have had to bounce back from really difficult circumstances. So we're going to be showing a little bit about how some of these attacks that you've probably heard of might have developed. And this is, I believe, also based on real ransomware attack that Varonis observed, right? And by the way, if you don't know, my day job is I work at Varonis, as does Killian. And one of the things that Varonis does is work with companies who are under attack. So we often will send in an incident response team and be like, hey, show us like what your logs are saying, saying, we're going to try to help you figure out like what's happening. So this demonstration, I believe, is based on a real attack. We can't say like against who it was, but I believe we can say maybe like what type of ransomware it was based on.
Yeah, so this would be indicative of the Maze ransomware kind of attack chain scenario where, Emotet was part of it. We saw that late last year, and Ryuk is similar or intertwined with that as well. So it's indicative of all these different types of APT and attack groups.
Cool. All right, so this is, something that you might expect to see in the real world if you were a blue team and you were working for a company trying to figure out how this attack happened. Or if you were a red team and you wanted to show your bosses like why they really need to fix some of these problems, because it could lead to, let's say that this one secretary has access to the entire file share with everybody's files on it. This is a way that you could go in and say, hey, I've done a pen test, and according to this attack chain, I could ransomware all of these files, which would really, really mess up your organization. So a lot of times people are just like, why are you posting this online? It's kind of like you're teaching people to rob a bank and then telling them not to. Well, it's because we don't teach you guys like how these things happen. Blue team people will never know about the attacks and they won't be able to defend against them. And red team people won't know that this is possible. So they won't test the organizations they work for against these things. And then when they get hit by a real criminal, they're going to be in serious trouble. So there's perfectly legitimate, uses for all this stuff. And if there's anybody who has concerns about us like making this information public, really this is just good security training we're trying to make available for free to all of you who might want to get into cybersecurity. So we also had a question if I had a Hackeroni account. I actually don't do bug bounties myself, but I highly encourage people to do it. So if you want to get in with HackerOne, aka Hackeroni, or Bugcrowd or something, and get started with this sort of stuff, then it's a great place to go. And before we get started, I also wanted to mention, if you are coming to us from Null Byte, Nick, the other co-host from Null Byte, also just did an excellent series on getting started with Android Studio hacking if you do want to do bug bounty style stuff. So check out those episodes on SecurityFWD if you want to see a little bit about how you can actually get started with doing bug bounties, because the stuff we're doing today is not as applicable to like Bugcrowd or HackerOne. It's more like serious pen testing and stuff with like very real consequences. So Killian, I'll let you take it away.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much. I appreciate it. So maybe to answer one of the debates in the chat here, aside from BOS, which is my go-to OS, if anybody remembers that, there's a deep cut. We're using Kali Linux as the background here to run our attack and Metasploit. So what I have up right now is a terminal. I'm running Metasploit in it. That's going to serve as our command and control and our launching point for this attack chain. I'm going to do things a little bit differently than we would typically see it. The attacker would mostly have this very hackery screen and interact with the command line. For the sake of demonstration, I'm going to show you something that no end user would ever see, which is the attack running on their machine. Typically, this would be completely silent. They would never see it after the initial infection stage. But again, for the sake of dramatic purposes, we want everybody to be able to very clearly see what's happening in the process. So as I mentioned, I'm the attacker now on my attacker machine. I have my Kali Linux up and my terminal open with Metasploit, just waiting for some innocent victim to connect. And I'm going to get them to do that by sending them, wait for it, a booby-trapped Office document. There we go.
So we're kind of picking up where we left off last time. And we had one question from the chat that I thought was kind of interesting, which was, is there any ransomware that uses machine learning to attack its targets? And at first I was just like, well, ransomware is so simple that it doesn't really need to. That would be kind of like an excess bulk. But really, if you were looking to attack a much more sophisticated or well-defended target, and for example, you wanted to use machine learning to create like a fingerprint of like what normal user interaction looks like, or like try to figure out some sneakier stuff, I imagine you probably could. It just adds a whole new layer of complexity to something that's usually pretty simple and that virtually anybody could do.
Yeah, and that's an interesting question. I've never really considered it either. I mean, we've seen some of these pieces of ransomware evolve. Like I think Ryuk just came back and had a new update where it does some more self-spreading and things like that. So it's constantly under development now. I don't know about machine learning. That's a fairly heavy lift for something that's that's fairly noisy anyway. I don't know if you'd be running it for that long, and the attackers probably wouldn't want to risk it. But again, the developments are always coming, and I don't want to give anybody ideas. So,
cool. And last question before we get started. Someone says, "Why do you use Kali? That's for skits." Gatekeepers off the stream, please. We've been doing this for so long. We could hack this with a potato. It doesn't matter what operating system you're using, Windows, whatever. Like, if you can hack something with it, you're a hacker. That's it. Like, if you are concerned about what operating system someone is using, guys, it doesn't matter. Parrot OS, they're all based on Debian. Like, a lot of these debates between like Kali and Parrot OS are purely aesthetic and in the way that they like handle some packages. And you could really set one up to behave very much like the other if you really wanted to. So it's like, don't worry about operating systems. Use the one that you're familiar with. Like, frankly, like, there's no best operating system except for maybe one specific use case. So do not trouble yourself. You could do this on Parrot Security OS. You could do this on Black-Arch. You could do this on Gentoo. You could do it on anything you want. Really, this attack will work on just about anything you want to. So the fact that we're using Kali doesn't mean anything. But Kali is a perfectly good operating system, and lots of very reputable security researchers, such as myself and Killian, use it. Although, frankly, I use Ubuntu more often. So think about that.
This is getting way down the debate, and I have lots of stories to tell about trying to compile Gentoo from source code like many years ago. Boy, I don't even think we ever succeeded and we gave up. But that's something else completely different. It's nice to have options now where we don't have to do that anymore. But anyway. Jumping back into it, I did switch screens while we were talking here. I'm now on my victim computer. I'm on a different virtual machine, and I have my Outlook open. I'm regular old user, logged into my machine. I get this email here from Canada Post saying, hey, wait a minute, they attempted to deliver my item. And I'm thinking, wow, this is great. It's not even my birthday, and someone's sending me something from Canada, no less. A little international goodwill from our neighbors up north, at least for me. I don't know
I'm thinking,
in the world.
Someone forgot to deliver my package.
Right. So I'm looking at it, and as I mentioned, this is based off of a real attack scenario. So this would have been May's group used something very similar to this. And what we're seeing more and more is, gone are the days where the Nigerian prince is asking for something and you have it in messed up, grammatically incorrect language. Maybe the attackers are starting to use Grammarly or something like that. But we're seeing much more well-crafted phishing emails, much more well-crafted documents to increase that click rate. And it's just like marketing in any business here. You make it look good, you make it look enticing, you're going to get that higher click rate. And still, to this day, phishing is so effective, it's almost ridiculous. And we've had this for forever. So anyway,
phishing like this is also, I just want to point out, a really common secondary vector where like somebody will get breached and then the attacker will go into their email and the first thing they will do is look at recent invoices, get the style correct, and send out a malicious invoice to every single one of their customers. This happened to a logistics company that I work with. I got a malicious email from them and I was like, what? I called them and they were like, oh yeah, someone just did an email prank. It's like, no, you just attacked like all of your customers at the same time. So this is a very common vector, not just out of the blue, but also from companies that are breached, basically going after all of their people that they do business with.
And Emotet built that into the whole functionality of their attack chain too, with the email jacking. And even if we look at, for example, the exchange of vulnerabilities from that came out over the last couple of weeks, that's another vector there. If they have access to the exchange mailbox, they can dump all of the emails, go through and start that reply back to an existing thread, spoof the sender and say, hey, click on this. If I see an email from Kody, I go, oh, Kody, it's probably something we got to collaborate on for our show. There's a higher likelihood I will click if it looks legitimate and is part of initial or part of an existing email thread as well. So in this case, I'm going to take a look. I want my gift from Canada. Like, this is going to be some good stuff. So I'm going to click on here and it's going to say, hey, let's hope it behaves. There it goes. Hey, download my document, my package invoice. I want to take a look and see who's sending me something, what it is, what I'm getting, and get some details. So opening up Word here.
We just had a really good question.
Yep.
The question was, do you think the biggest problem is ransomware or people not being prepared, or companies not being prepared for ransomware? And at first I was going to say like probably just ransomware because all of these 0 days. But frankly, if you have a company that's prepared for this and establishes like, the secretary only gets access to, the minimum things that he or she needs, then like if you do get hit with ransomware, it nukes like one computer and you're like, oh no, but your whole
Yeah.
organization is fine. So I would say actually companies not being prepared for ransomware is probably worse than ransomware, because if they get hit and they're prepared,
Right.
that it's not an emergency. Whereas if they get hit
Yeah.
and they are not prepared at all, that it sucks. So interesting question.
No, I completely agree. You're right. That's a great question. That's a whole other, we can talk forever about that topic too, but you can call it what you want. Least privilege, you can call it zero trust. That's gotten a lot more play. It's been a big security practice for a while, but that's exactly it, is absolutely bare minimum. Don't trust kind of everybody, or constantly verify it. Make sure that their access is limited to just their role. It's reviewed often, their behaviors reviewed often, make sure there's no signs of compromise, because we have to assume breach, right? We have to assume that either the attackers are in or they will get in. So we need all of those layers in place. But then that is an excellent question.
Yeah, it made me think a little bit. But,
right.
All right, back to you.
Yeah, no, all good. These are the reasons that we have these. We love these discussions. So anyway, here's my invoice, right? Taking a look, not telling me a whole lot. Oftentimes we'll put in, the attackers will put in a little message here like, oh, click to see the invoice you're using, an old version of Word or something like that, or whatever it happens to be. But as we know, something's going to happen if I click enable editing. Okay, I'll click that. There we go. Wait, something's changing here. Well, that's not still telling me a whole lot, but I guess I'm still expecting something. I guess I have to take action here, right? But by simply clicking that, for any of the viewers who saw the episode last week, something happened in the background now.
Right. And one misconception, like a couple people walked away last time, was with that this only works on a specific like file, like an Excel file. But no, you can, like most like Office files, you can embed something malicious in. So this is not just like a Word file. It's not just an Excel file. It's a whole bunch of different types of files that can all exhibit this behavior.
Yeah, exactly. Oops, my terminal actually closed out on me, so let me run that again. Gotta love the live demo to make sure that it works. Okay. I thought I did that already. Okay, cool. Here we go. There we go. So anyway, here's my slightly different invoice. So here's my invoice again, like we just talked about. I guess I saved it in the different location. But anyway, what happens when I enable that is some macros are running in the background, and here it goes. Okay. It established a session back to my command and control. So we're sitting here just waiting. This could be sent out indiscriminately, and anybody who clicks on this is going to call back out. So it's going to, from my machine, it's now running some code in the background. It's going to call back out to my command and control channel here. So again, this is something that we showed built out in that other video, how we can have this terminal, have it do that call back out. We can hide it, in simple normal web traffic, with HTTP posts and some command and control that way. We can do it real tricky over DNS. So there's a lot of options to get this communication channel back out to establish very surreptitiously.
So one question was, do you have Windows Defender on or off?
In this machine, that's a good question. Actually, I'm not sure if this is on or off. I don't know if I checked this particular lab. Oh, in this case, it's off, or I must have disabled it.
Okay, worth noting.
And let's see. I want to start my interactive session.
Do you think there's any part of this that Windows Defender would trip on?
Potentially, some of the later steps. As we kind of get through there, we're in a lot of cases living off the land in this particular one. So I'm going to upload in a second. Actually, I'll do it right now while I'm talking.
So for the initial exploit, that wouldn't trigger anything. So up until this point,
potentially right,
we shouldn't have triggered Windows Defender whatsoever, because we're using tools that are built in to do something that's not necessarily inherently malicious yet. Some of the stuff we're about to do, though, is definitely malicious, and there's a potential that Windows Defender could catch.
Yeah, absolutely. Some of these, like I said, I uploaded this bat file, and this has a kind of some staging things. A lot of it is written in native, batch file scripting or in PowerShell. So this is an example of living off the land as well, too. If I want to be really kind of low and slow and methodical, I can use PowerShell built into pretty much every Windows computer to execute some of this without even having to load known malicious code necessarily. Just simply running the commands are not they wouldn't be flagged like by traditional antivirus because it's not malicious code. There are some things, EDR and of course, not to shout out too much, but Varonis will catch some of the behavior, like the command and control and some of the interactivity at that point as we move along a little bit further. So in this case, I started an interactive session with that machine. So now I'm communicating with it, and I uploaded my tools.bat to that machine, and that's how I'm going to kick off kind of the process. Actually, the first thing I want to do first is I'm just running as a regular user on that particular machine. I am going to use some Metasploit exploits built into the tool to get systems. It's going to make life obviously so much easier.
Can you explain? One of the questions was, what is Metasploit for any total beginners who are joining us?
So it's actually a really cool framework. I forget who owns it now, but
Rapid7?
lot of time, that's it. That's who it was. Thank you. But it's a framework that's put together that has built-in modules for a lot of the known exploits that are coming out. So it's great for pen testing, for example. A lot of it is built into the solution, so you can run scripts and things like that, and have it automatically execute some of the exploits, basically, to not have to do it manually. I guess is maybe the most simple way to put it. Where if there's a particular exploit I know that I want, or I scan a machine, and I see like a vulnerable, vulnerable ports or vulnerable services running on those ports, I can say run this exploit code, and it will just take care of it for me, and then return back whatever it is, a shell, for example, once it's executed. That's, I guess, the simplest way to explain it.
Yeah, no, that's perfect.
Cool. Awesome. Okay, so in this case, I went ahead and got system here. So I've elevated my rights on the machine that I'm on right now. So I have a little bit more freedom to do some of these things now. And I'm going to kick off my tools, kind of the process that's built in. So.
And one question was whether a firewall would make establishing a command and control server more difficult. Yes, but there's always ways around this. I mean, frankly, you can use sneaky things like DNS exfiltration or like all sorts of like other stuff to establish like back channels and like figure out what you can and can't do and adapt to it. So, I mean, yes, but we have no idea what your firewall configurations are, so we can't really say specifically whether or not it would stop this attack.
And some of it too is just it's being really sneaky. So HTTP traffic is often allowed outbound. They might check it at the perimeter. You might be monitoring some of that too. So this is some of the places where defenders can start to detect some of this activity if they're monitoring, if they're looking for low reputation domains, for example, or odd DNS traffic and things like that. But it's often very, very difficult to do unless you're really analyzing it. So in this case, I kicked off my tools. Yeah, go ahead.
One question was also, what percentage of these sorts of attacks do you think don't trip Windows Defender? I was going to say 100% of the successful ones. Like basically, like launching a campaign like this that isn't designed to evade Windows Defender doesn't make sense. So that would be my response. Yeah.
I mean, it depends. It depends on the amount of recon the attackers have done too. If it's spray and pray or kind of real low sophistication attackers, chances are it might set some of this stuff off. But the really advanced APT groups will do their recon. They'll compromise systems that maybe won't have endpoints. So if we look at SolarWinds, for example, they were able to compromise that box, so they were essentially an insider there without ever hitting an endpoint potentially. So there are always ways, right?
Yeah,
there are always different ways in. So this is the part in the demo too that I said I'm back on my end user machine. You will never have an attack group that will have this nice pop-up window here and say, please go ahead and execute my attack script. I'm doing this for sake of demonstration. It's a little bit more interesting than kind of looking at the return information in the terminal. So let's go ahead and there we go. Move on for that. So now, one of the first things I would do is after I established a foothold on a machine, we're assuming that this is indiscriminate or somewhat indiscriminate. I'm just kind of sending this phishing out and see who I get at the organization. Once I've gotten somebody, once I've got that foothold, the first thing that I want to do is learn about what else is out there on that network. And the way I'm going to do it in this demo is by using reverse DNS lookups. Again, this is another example of living off the land. This is what it's built for. Hey, I need to communicate with whoever, www.hacker.com. Go ahead and do that translation, translate it to the IP address. You can do it in reverse too. I can say, show me anybody on the network here in this range. So, if you've done an IP config or an IF config, if you're on Linux, just look at your network address. I can do that DNS lookup here and say, hey, in my network range, show me who else is out there. Hey, DNS, who is this?
So one question we just had was, don't Microsoft products show a warning when you're about to enable macros or something? My response to that is, it is yellow and not red, and it kind of blends in with the whole scheme. So it does not look like an emergency in any way, shape, or form, and people click on it anyway.
And there are lots, and the other thing too is to point out is, yes, they do put that warning in there, but there are plenty of legitimate reasons to click on and enable that. If you have, for example, an Excel document that could be running macros to collect information from various sources and populate tables and things like that, there are tons of reasons to click on that. And also, if it's like in protected view, you say, hey, enable editing, it's also a yellow bar with the click enable. So it's habit for people. They do try and warn you. It is somewhat effective, but I wouldn't base my defense strategy on that. We have to just assume someone's going to click on it, right?
Yeah.
So in this case, Kody, can you see this okay? It looks a little bit bigger on my screen than the other week too. I can zoom in too if not.
I can actually read this okay. If you guys can't see it in the chat, please let us know. If you're watching on like a tiny screened potato, like let us know and we'll try to make it a bit bigger.
I have my magnifier ready to go just in case, but if it's good, we're good.
Yeah, I think we're all right.
Cool. So in this case, I went through all of the different networks in the range there, just doing basically, NS lookup, 10.60.204.1, 2, programmatically. And what I did is resolved all of that information with the host names of everything out there. I see a couple interesting things. I see, Hub DC, it's probably my domain controller, a couple desktops, Hub Exchange, Hub Filer, a couple other things here in my environment. So definitely some juicy targets at this point that I might be interested in attacking. So what I want to do, though, is I don't really know who I have compromised. I don't know what my level of rights are. But maybe I want to try and just do some real... This is a little bit noisy in terms of an attack. As an attacker, I wouldn't necessarily do a password spray right off the bat because it is quite noisy. But I want to do a password spray just to see if there are any accounts out there that I can just quickly compromise and get additional credentials here. So I went through, did my password spray, tried to connect any of these guys. In this case, nothing particular popped out. I wasn't particularly successful. Sometimes this is, especially if you're using, Kody, I know you and I had talked about this before, if you're using like a previous breach, hoping that somebody maybe had their username and password stored somewhere else.
Very common way of getting popped. Like out of the blue too. Most people have no idea. Oh, there was a couple people saying that on their potatoes, it's a little bit difficult to see. Okay. So if you're able to zoom in on this part, it is quite interesting to see.
Yeah. I'll zoom in just a little bit here. Well, anyway, just basically attempting, password spraying on these different various accounts. In this case, I completed it. Nothing particularly interesting happened. So this organization is doing pretty okay right now. I wasn't able to quickly get access to a different account. So either their users have a good password policy, they weren't part of another breach, things like that. So this is a noisy attack. Sometimes people will do it, sometimes they won't. But in this case, it wasn't successful for me. So I want to move on to something a little bit more interesting and a little bit more tricky and actually quite common anymore. We're seeing in a lot of these more sophisticated attacks. So I want to start a ticket harvesting attack. So as a user in an AD domain, one of the things that I can do is I can reach out and say, hello domain, I would like to interact with a service somewhere. And in AD, we have accounts that are running these services. And the whole process is that a regular user to interact with them would reach out and say, I would like to interact with this service. It would say, sure thing. Here is a ticket back. Go ahead, use that to interact with the service. I won't go through the whole ticket exchange process, but anyway, I get tickets off of this. So what I'm going to do now is, first off, I'm going to just talk to the domain and say, hey, who's out there who has that service principal name? So who's running a service, what accounts are running a service that I might be able to talk to and interact with? And this is not hacker anything right now. This is purely how Active Directory works. And this is supposed to work this way because, as a user or an account, I need to interact with these different services. And this is the way, you put it in AD, they have the service principal name, we can interact and everybody's happy, right? So in this case, this is where it's going to get a little bit tricky, but again, not necessarily super, hackery at this point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and I'm going to pretend like, hey, I'm, a Windows XP computer and I can't handle modern encryption. So please, I would like to request access to these services. But I'm an old operating system. I only can handle, I think it's RC4. So the old NTLM hash or the RC4 hash for it. So very, very weak.
But so you're basically performing a downgrade attack. This system is designed to provide backwards compatibility to computers that didn't have as strong encryption standards. So we can force the system to use the weakest possible encryption that it supports by masquerading as a really crappy computer.
Yep, exactly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and grab those tickets, dump them all out of there. And again, this is not, this is a little bit of tooling here, but getting this information is typically automatic. We've just done it programmatically. We've requested it with Mimikatz in this case. So now I have all of my tickets from all of those services requested with that lower encryption standard. And in this case, when they're passing this back, it's actually encrypted with, I believe, the hash of the password for the account. So it's very
smart. Very smart.
It makes sense, but in this case, now I have all these tickets. What I want to do is, first off, I want to find out which ones I want to spend my time on. So I'm going to, again, just say, hey, Active Directory, please tell me who's a domain admin, because that's the brass ring here. That's the cream of the crop. I don't want to have to worry about it. Oh, and there it goes. It started right away. So once I know that, I'm going to target just those accounts for this. And since I have the tickets, I can take this offline and spend as much time as I want. So right now, we're not interacting with Active Directory at all. I've gotten the tickets already. Now I'm just running an offline crack on that. So basically with that low encryption RC4, as I mentioned, it's going to just try the passwords. And once the ticket opens for me, we know we have that the password correct.
So I like to make an analogy to Wi-Fi hacking, on this, because if, for example, if we're doing Wi-Fi hacking, we're getting a hash of the password, and then we're trying to brute force it, and that's totally offline. We could go, fly 1,000 miles away and still be attacking the hash that we've gathered. This is basically the same attack. Once we are on a Windows system that uses Active Directory, and we're able to request basically a hashed version of the password for all these potentially administrator accounts, we can then attack that hash because we know it's relatively weak. It was conceived a long time ago when computing power wasn't really there as much. So now that we have access to all this great computing power, we can break especially weak passwords and be able to get into these service or administrator accounts.
Yep, exactly. So in this case, we went through, we tried all the different hashes. We found the one that worked. It allows us to get access to the ticket. So we know that's the correct one that matches up. And our password is a very strong password. I'm surprised it got this, maybe the best password ever. Wow. Password 1 meets all the complexity requirements. We got a symbol, we got a number in there. Maybe we could have used an uppercase. Maybe that was it. But anyway, we have the password here. We could do this offline. And as you mentioned, with the computing power out there now, with this weak encryption standard, we can churn through this pretty quickly.
Someone was asking what you use to crack the hash.
So we used Mimikatz to grab that, and let me see if it'll let me roll up and see exactly what tool I'm using here. You could use John the Ripper. There's so many. Actually, it might be John the Ripper, honestly. But there's so many different tools that do this. You can pick your favorite one, really.
Yeah. Hashcat was one that was also mentioned.
Hashcat, yeah. So many good ones out there. We have no shortage of choice for which one we happen to like the best, right? So now that we have this password, we've done a couple things so far. We've learned about what else is on the network that we might want to attack that's juicy. And now we also have the password to an account with elevated rights, with domain admin rights. So the world's our oyster at this point. What we can do is we can use that to get access to kind of anything, really. Even if the company, was, even if I got access to an account that didn't have any access to anything, I've now elevated my rights. So I'm way more dangerous. And typically, an attacker, if I wasn't looking to be real loud, or if I was looking to kind of live here for a little while, explore things, I would start to establish other backdoors, create other accounts for myself. With admin, you can install things. This is kind of what we saw with the Exchange attack. Once you got system, they started installing like web shells and stuff like that too. So lots of stuff that you can do to maintain that persistency, in addition to just spreading out and looking for what you want to steal.
Yeah, and just for some perspective, for anybody just joining us, we went from somebody like maybe like a secretary or something opening a malicious document all the way to harvesting credentials from the system and being able to log into like a service account as an administrator. So now we are not a threat to the secretary's computer. We are a threat to the entire network.
Exactly.
And that's really like what we're trying to get across here is like we went from like one small computer being potentially ransomware to, because this company doesn't seem to, you know, restrict this information or like prevent it from being accessed by, you know, several people, we've now managed to get up to a position where we can do all sorts of damage.
Yep. Yeah, and this is so far, you know, we're using some tools here, but this is mostly leveraging built-in normal, or we're misusing built-in normal Active Directory functionality here to our advantage. Again, requesting those low encryption tickets and then cracking it offline. So now let's take it a step further. This is typically the next thing. I guess maybe I'll steal a phrase from one of our other coworkers. You don't break into a bank to steal the pens, right? So now that we have this access, what I want to do is I want to find something that's worth stealing. I want to find sensitive information. In a lot of cases, what we're seeing with these attack groups is it's multi-pronged. It's not just ransomware anymore where you're trying to get money from the organization to get their data back. You want to increase the conversion rate, increase the chances they're going to pay you. So what they do is if they don't have any other use for it, they're still going to find this data. And I'm going to use a file crawler. This is just using PowerShell. This is it looks a little bit nicer, but I can write this in a 2-line PowerShell script. Go out there and search for, you know, anything that contains like confidential information. You know, you can do it with social securities, credit card numbers, whatever it is you happen to want. You can do this very easily with PowerShell. Barely any coding required, honestly. So right now I'm using my elevated credentials that I have, which should give me access to pretty much everything on my file server to find this information. And here we go.
One person said, by the way, that this would never work against a really strong password, like a 14-character password. Just so you know, if I wanted to burn like $100 on like a GPU-enabled AWS instance and like really go after something that I know the password requirements for, you could do it. It just, you know, with the ability to just buy computing power to do an offline crack like this, you can basically throw as much power as you want at this scenario. And depending on how much you want to spend, you will eventually break it.
Sure. Or, yeah, I mean, and that's the other thing, though, too. In this particular scenario, we know it's a weak password and things like that. As an attacker, this wouldn't be my only option, of course. And maybe there's accounts out there that don't meet the password requirement. It's shocking how often we see sometimes things are configured or misconfigured, you know, or there's a local account or something else out there. But there are other ways to go about this. But yeah, with enough time and enough resources, anything is possible. You know, but again, you know, it's all layers of defense and layers of attack. The more that I have to make the attacker work for it, and we're absolutely encouraging you to, you know, have good password policies and, you know, long ones and change them often and things like that, to thwart us. Again, because it's time and money, of course, or time resources. But again, think about this too. If you're dealing with a, you know, large, you know, attack group or a nation state attacker, time and money are no object. Their mission doesn't end if you stop one of their intrusion attempts. So
yeah,
you know. So anyway, I found a lot of great information here that I want to steal. A lot of finance folders. So what I'm going to do then quickly is I'm going to just copy them locally, and then I'm going to put them in a zip file, and I'm going to encrypt that zip file as I create it. So of course, compressing it just easier for me to get out, especially if I'm dealing with large volumes of data. This is just a staging area. And then I'm also going to encrypt it here too, in case we have some type of perimeter controls or scanning, and they're looking inside of that for data and motion scanning to see if I have anything in there that's flagged or blocked. So this is just one way to try and evade some of the controls in an organization. So there we go. So now I have my encrypted zip file. My crawling is complete. Now I have something I'm ready to try and exfiltrate out of the organization.
So the purpose of that would be to either do like a blackmail attack or, you know, like otherwise ensure that if there was something juicy and useful for the attacker, that they would have access to it before detonating their ransomware that makes it so no one has access to the data.
Yeah. So, in a lot of companies, they have, hopefully they have good backup strategy or they have a process for it. I mean, there are some ransomware that will target some of the backups and there are all sorts of kind of give and takes here, but organizations have to worry about their intellectual property going out the door, other confidential information, regulated data. All of these things can get them into trouble in various different ways, and they're more likely to maybe pay the attackers to not disclose this information. So your super secret pancake mix recipe, which is the lifeblood of your organization. I just made that up. I'm sure
or damaging results from like a drug study or something that maybe are about to seriously impact your financials before a statement goes out that would cause chaos to your stock. Like there's lots of things that a big business would be really worried about. Maybe like personal information about executives, like all sorts of internal emails, like all that sort of stuff could lead to investigations, fines, crashes in their stock. Like there's lots of reasons why a malicious actor might want access to the data that they're also encrypting. And we do see this, like double exploitation attacks where you're ransom for the data, but you're also ransom to not release parts of the data in damaging ways are increasingly common because people are looking to squeeze every last cent out of an attack that they do.
Yep. So in this case, we're just uploading the file. This is just a really easy one. We're doing I believe it's just an HTTP post or an HTTPS post to an anonymous file hosting site. You can pick your file hosting site. You can host your own if you want to. You can spin up that AWS instance, put up your web server there that lets you post files up there. But in this case, it's uploaded. It's out the door now as the attacker. In a second, I should get a link for it then too, once it's completed its process. That way I can grab it later on or download it or share it around with whoever.
Stop selling Robux in the comments. Sorry.
Eric. Oh, I missed it. Anyway, I hit go. But anyway, I got my link to the download the file. That's all that was there for a second. I got impatient. But it just had my link. So as the attacker, now it's been uploaded to my file sharing site. It generated a link for me here. And now I can download it offline or do whatever I want with it. The data is out the door is the main takeaway.
Cool. So you've basically done a hacker Dropbox for yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
You created a zip file, which, again, the purpose of zipping a file also is that it's more difficult for automated defenses to scan the contents. Often we'll see like malware or even things that just need to be exfiltrated that are sensitive that would trigger something. They're like double, triple, sometimes quadruple zipped because compression makes it more difficult to perform an automatic scan. And after one layer of depth, most antivirus scanners or Defender or whatever just gives up. So packing or zipping is a very, very common practice because it adds a layer of obfuscation and difficulty for automatic detection.
Exactly. And here we're maybe at the end of our journey right now. So I've thoroughly compromised the organization. I found the data that I wanted to steal. I've gotten it out of the organization. Now, time to go loud, time to ask for that money. Let's kick off Maze Ransomware here. So this is I'm going to send my calling card now. Here we go.
Whoa.
This is business right now. So there it is. Here's my note. As I mentioned, I am running on the end user machine. So here's I believe this is actually a sanitized one, but this is a real example of Maze Ransomware note. It's running in the background.
They got rid of all the swears.
Yep. And here he's encrypting data not only on my local system, we missed it, but on the file systems that my account had access to. So it's not just a risk on one particular machine. Anything that has a map drive or I can connect to potentially is at risk as well too.
So this is what you guys are seeing being executed is a system-wide attack. It is not just against this one computer. It is against everything this computer was able to pull down and crack in terms of service accounts. Like this really is setting off something that's affecting the entire network. And
then as we were talking there, if you noticed, it logged out my machine and actually shut it down. Spoiler alert for anybody, this lab does have Varonis running. We were able to detect that, and we had an automated response set up. So it actually killed the machine that I was running that on. And that would be typical in an organization with these defenses in place. When we spot that behavior, to be able to take action. That way, if this goes off, it's really there's two metrics that we're concerned about in this particular case. Time to detection, of course, the faster that we can spot any one of these things, the faster that we can respond. And the second is time to response. So in this case, the response was very fast because it was automated with our system. But in the background, and we won't go into it here, if you looked at the Varonis console, we had alerts all along this kill chain for a lot of those steps that we went through. And that's the time to detection portion of it. If we can find this before they get the data, before they get it out of the organization, before they kick off that ransomware, the organization is going to be in a much better position. Of course, that's pretty obvious.
Right. So, like, if this were to go off against like a medium or small size business, like there would very likely be nothing in the chain that would cause this to stop. This would go off exactly as we did it because there wouldn't be any sort of advanced behavior detection. Now, you know, if it's a big company like somebody that works with Varonis, then like they're going to be like, hey, we noticed a gigabyte of DNS traffic. Seems a little unusual. Perhaps we should look into recent account access and recent activity. So like, you know, this sort of attack that we demonstrated today against a really big business probably wouldn't work because layers of defense that prevent them from, you know, having some of this suspicious stuff happen in the first place. Now, another question was, what type of encryption is used here? Well, typically for a ransomware attack, attackers will use a form of asymmetric encryption. They will keep a private key on their system and then generate a public key for which they will use to encrypt all the data on the victim computer, and then that the private key that they have access to is what they're selling. It's basically their product, because without that private key, you will not be able to decrypt the data that was encrypted. And the public key that's out there doesn't really help you either. So it's really interesting to see how strong encryption has caused this industry to kind of pick up. But if you want to learn more about the encryption behind this and why it's so difficult to decrypt this, look up asymmetric encryption. Because it's really fascinating and yeah, very cool. Oh, also we did on the Security Forward channel, which you can find on hackingwithfriends.com, I believe we also did an episode where Michael and I made up our own ransomware and we each explained how the encryption on it works. So if you want to see an episode, a live stream we did on just how ransomware encryption works, then my sample is actually available on GitHub, so you can probably check that out too, because a lot of people are asking for samples. Again, please, it is real dumb Python. I think I used bash maybe. So it's like, it's literally just bash scripting. So if you want to try to attack a bunch of computers with bash scripting, more power to you. But yeah, like you'll see that it's very, very simple to pull off these attacks, and they use strong encryption to make it virtually impossible. Yeah. Someone also says Kody's hair is really long. Yeah, I moved out of LA like a year ago, and I haven't had a haircut since because of the pandemic. So it's going to be like this for a while, but thanks for noticing. So I think that's the point where we're going to start opening things up for questions. We've got another maybe like 10 minutes or so, and there were so many great questions about this that I want to make sure we address all of them. You know, some of them, a lot of them were about Windows Defender and whether or not this could actually like happen with Windows Defender. Of course, our answer was yes, because a lot of this is living off the land and using built-in tools to do things that don't seem that sneaky. So we took a couple shortcuts here today just to show you guys something that was very clear and straightforward and not waste a lot of time with obfuscation. But typically an attacker would spend substantially more time hiding what they're doing and making it more sneaky. We just, again, wanted to show it very visibly to you, but having everything base 64 encoded, so like it's not clear what it is or like scrambled. We did that on our previous episode, I believe. So like there are techniques of doing that, but we just can't fit it all into the stream today.
And a lot of cases too, it's worth mentioning that these sophisticated attack groups oftentimes are in organizations for weeks or months before they even get to this point. So they spend a lot of time in there going very low and very slow, really understanding who they're dealing with. They've done a lot of pre-research in a lot of cases before getting to this point. So there's a lot of work that goes in here to hide their tracks. Again, this is much more close to a kind of a smash and grab than you'd see from an advanced APT group.
Yeah, one person said, hard code the password. That's the best way to make ransomware. If you are a kind ransomware developer and you want to make it's like, all right, you can either give me $10,000 or you can spend an hour going through the code and just, the keys right there. There are ransomware attacks that do actually have the password hard coded in them, which I think is hilarious. So that actually does happen. A lot of people are also asking if we're going to be posting like the tools.bat. No. These are demonstrations that use like mostly live ransomware. So we're happy to show like what they do, but a lot of this is also publicly available. Metasploit, Mimikatz, that stuff is all public. So if you were to, for example, to just watch our last video where we literally show you the code for an Office macro and combine that with like Mimikatz and like Metasploit, You've got pretty much like 80 to 90% of this attack chain if you need to try it out for yourself for legal purposes. We really can't go any further in terms of just like releasing like a pre-made exploit for you guys. So yeah, we already get in enough trouble with YouTube on Null Byte. We don't need to fan the fires any further. But
it's also worth mentioning too. I don't know if we want to link this or not. We had a Varonis customer actually in during the POC for Varonis. He said more or less like, you know, I know all this, but, you know, I got to test it out myself. And he rolled his own ransomware and ran it against the system we were monitoring. So you can do it. You know, it's out there. You know, you need a little time and a little coding background, but you can. Again, I wouldn't recommend it, but it's out there. You know, you can do it very simply, too, with PowerShell if you really wanted to. Just, you know, to get a sample, just rename the file extension or something. It's built in. Not really ransomware. But if you want to do it in a closed lab, in a safe environment, minimally destructively, that's a way to get a kind of a feel for what it would look like, for example.
Yeah, that's a good point. One question was also, where would you begin to look for a hard-coded password? Would you need to track down the original stager or the executable? That's a complicated question. This gets into reverse engineering, where we would need to look at the module that was actually running. Typically, in a multi-stage piece of ransomware, you have the initial piece that runs that establishes the beachhead on the system. You then pull down tools the same way that you saw Killian, like pull down tools from like his Metasploit instance, and then from those tools on the system, you would start to do stuff. So it would be the tools that you would need to basically reverse engineer that hopefully wouldn't be deleted. So really, in order to recover this, you could do a couple things. For one, you could get the original file, you could get a new virtual machine, and a lot of ransomware will actually check to see if it's running on a virtual machine, and it won't execute if it is. That's to prevent you from doing this. But if you run the original file on a virtual machine, and then it pulls down the tools or whatever else you want to reverse engineer, you could then use something like Ghidra to decompile it, take a look at the original source code, and look to see, hey, are there any hard-coded credentials in here? Are there any hard-coded elements that can be used to, you know, maybe like break the encryption here or get back into the files? And there are totally people that use absolutely just awful ransomware modules that they bought online. Some people were asking, you know, is this attack, do you need to know about coding to do it? No. There's plenty of people who go on online forums and purchase, you know, pre-made ransomware tools, which are terrible. They're the lowest quality, but they do work. They'll scan the internet and go after random victims. And, you know, they just have there was a story of the San Francisco BART system being taken out by some dude who just bought like a ransomware package, ransomware to system that would belong to like a large city, and like got in huge trouble and got scared. So he walked away and wouldn't give them the password because he didn't want to get in trouble. So like, you know, there's instances where this stuff happens and people just buy a malware. Cyber criminals will buy a malware tool, execute it, and then, you know, freak out because they didn't expect it to hit like a big target and end up causing a bunch of people to get to ride the metro for free.
Yeah, I mean, and you can buy the good stuff too, if you know where to look. You know, like Ryuk is an example that I believe is a service, or often used as a service. So it's out there. You don't have to roll your own encryption. You don't really need to know much of anything, which is the scariest part about it. Is some of the more indiscriminate ransomware attacks. You have somebody who's looking to make a buck. Give them a couple Bitcoin, you can, you know, get access to the service. What we showed here would be moving towards the more sophisticated attack, where you're really moving around. In the less sophisticated ones, you know, you click on the executable, it runs some automated stuff, you get ransomware, and you're toast. But a little bit between.
There's a question for you, Killian. What studies did you do? I think some people admire the knowledge you're demonstrating today and might want to get into a similar career field.
My actual college degrees are computer science, and I actually have a specific degree in computer security as well. And I have a CISSP that I got later after that in my career. So it depends. I mean, I guess I took a more traditional track, I suppose, to get where I am here. But I know, and I've worked with a lot of just absolutely staggeringly smart individuals who took it upon themselves to learn outside of college. You know, the guy who was my boss was a music major. I worked with a guy incredibly smart. I think he's pretty high up, a director or CISO now in the security field. I think he was a journalism major or something like that. So that was my track. I took a more traditional track. But I think, and Kody, I think you'll echo this back, having the curiosity to go out there and try and learn is the best, really the best thing that I can recommend more than anything else.
Yeah, definitely. And again, I came from a very non-traditional background, so if you don't start out in this sort of stuff, I got interested in hacking and started learning about the tools, learning how to use Linux tools, Python tools, and then I went back to community college. I took maybe a year of computer science and a year of electrical engineering and networking, and that gave me the broad kind of base of knowledge I have to be able to learn from other people who are much smarter than me at these kind of specific areas. So yeah, like I think that you can come from a lot of different backgrounds. Oh, and somebody was asking what's underneath all these stickers. You guys are going to be so mad. It's a MacBook Pro, and it costs more than a Honda Accord, and it sounds like one when I try to run anything. So do not recommend, but hey, if the company buys it, what are you going to do?
There you go.
Man, there's so many good questions. I think we've got about 5 more minutes, guys. So if you have any other questions about ransomware, about like careers with this, or if you have any suggestions for upcoming crossovers, you can also, again, check out the Hacking with Friends show, which we do like 3 times a week now, where you can see me, Nick from Null Byte, and some other people try out stuff like this every week and answer questions. So you can catch that on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. We have another new show on Monday with our friend Mike, who also is teaching about how to get security certification. So if you want to have a study buddy for like the CISSP, that's currently happening on Mondays too. And we're also very interested in hearing any more feedback about what would be useful for you guys who are getting into cybersecurity. I'm kind of secretly thinking like maybe doing some more bug bounty stuff, like the Android Studio hacking stuff we've been doing lately, or maybe even trying to lure some like bug crowd researchers over to like maybe do some demos or something. But anything you guys are interested in, we would love to show off. And again, having Killian on here is also super fun because we get to learn about these techniques that again are super advanced and like but simple enough for everybody to understand and be able to actually employ if you have a reason to.
Absolutely. I've seen a couple questions here. I'm just trying to watch the chat too about programming languages to learn and things like that. I mean, I guess it depends, right? It depends on what you're interested in learning. I saw a couple people mention Python. Python is an absolutely awesome language to learn. You can do a lot with it. Some of our other, in the previous lab, I think our CNC channel was written in Python, but it depends, C and C++, if you want to get a little bit lower in the operating system, for example, or if you want to kind of really, C is an interesting and a bit of a tough language, because it's not object oriented, so it's a little bit of kind of going back, but you learn a lot about pointers and a lot of how it works under the hood, which helps definitely too. It's a great way to illustrate like buffer overflows, for example. A lot of the attacks end up being buffer overflows. So C is another kind of good way to learn that, where you can do some very simple codes and then just, overflow the buffer. Just keep pumping things in if it's not bounded, for example.
And if you find yourself allergic to computer science on any level, or if you're just terrible with math, my 2 recommendations are Python and Bash scripting. Bash scripting is just like duct taping together a bunch of perfectly good Linux utilities to do basically anything. My friend and I used to go to, my friend Brandon, who's actually been on the show, we used to go to computer science meetups and just solve all of their like C++ problems in like Bash scripting in one line. Whereas like the actual code to do it would have to be like this long, because this was an elegant way of kind of stringing together applications. But again, Python is also very easy for beginners to get started with and learn, even if it doesn't give you as nuanced of an understanding of computer science. There was
PowerShell on Windows.
PowerShell as well.
Yeah.
There's another question about antiviruses not being able to detect malware because it's compressed. Aren't antiviruses decompressing / unpacking archives while scanning so they can read that file? So it's a very, very common practice for like malware people to multiply pack something, because it might, like a scanner might go the first layer down, but if things are packed below that, it typically doesn't recursively unpack everything, because you can also set it up to make it so slow to do that like nobody would ever possibly want to. So like dealing with like compressed files, like especially when you have limited file space or limited memory, just means that it's really difficult for an antivirus to get in there and deal with a highly, highly compressed image or something, especially when it's compressed in multiple levels. I went to a really excellent demonstration where someone like took malware samples and just packed them once, packed them twice, packed them in a couple different ways with like different file formats, and it just totally confused the virus scanners, and it was not that difficult to then unpack the sample. And you could have something that would totally trigger these virus scanners just get through scot-free by just packing it multiple times. So packing is a very, very, very common tactic. In our security training, we're told to look at zip files or like password protected zip files with increased scrutiny, because it's a very common way that threat actors will try to hide malware from automatic scanning. So apparently the scanners don't do as good of a job as people think, because it still works.
Yeah, and some of that's configuration too. That in another part of my life, in another part of my career, that was one of the things that I did, and it's a trade-off, right? The computers have gotten faster, more efficient, and you have more RAM on there, but it depends on the performance impact on the machines, if it's a server or a laptop, or it depends on the company policy too. If you're running a real high-end server that's doing business critical processing, you might not want to take the hit on running some type of antivirus on there, or it depends. It gets a lot of kind of business and politics. I saw somebody in the chat ask about sandbox environments that we use. Our labs, they're built by our company. They're run on Azure, and so they're a closed lab. But if you get, if you're on a Windows system, or if you're running a virtual machine, or I don't know if VMware still does it, but they offered an ESXi, I think was free, or they had a free version of it. You can get a couple virtual machines spun up on there if you have a server. That's what I used to do. I actually had 3 servers that I bought, and I was running ESXs on all of them in my apartment. And they were all connected together, so I had a little closed lab I could walk over to and try that. So it depends. There are resources out there to try some of this and sandbox it in very safe ways. Again, the best way, or the easiest way to do it, to make sure you don't destroy anything, is an air-gapped system in a couple machines networked together, or a standalone box that's running your hypervisor of choice with a couple machines that's not connected to the rest of your house or the internet.
I love this comment. Imagine if malware scanners accidentally open zip bombs to scan them. Yeah, that's one thing with packers. Like if you pack it right, you can trick it so that either the file size is too large, so it automatically just says, I can't scan this, it's too big, or it can just scale itself to the point that it gets to a depth where the computer's like, I'm not going any further than this.
I mean, this is going back like super many years ago. One of my friends wrote basically a zip bomb, like where he had something, whatever, zipped it so many times that at the end it was like a couple, gig or something like that. And then this was going back many years. It just, every time I tried to unzip it, it would just ate up the whole disk, and then the computer crashed.
So we have one kind of ethical question. If hacking isn't used for monetary gain or to blackmail someone or an organization, would it still be considered malicious? Well, there's 2 answers here. There's for work, and then there's hacker culture. For work, yes, you would. I mean, if you just hack into stuff because it's there, you will get into trouble. You don't have permission to access it. In the hacktivist community, there's many cases of people going after organizations that have terrible cybersecurity practices that are also performing a net harm to society, or releasing information that lets people know more about a circumstance that was either dangerous or unfair to customers. There's some circumstances in which this happens. A really good example might be the recent camera leak, where somebody found out that there was a super user mode that wasn't disclosed to customers on this camera network that freaked everybody out. And as soon as it became public, a lot of these customers were deeply uncomfortable with this feature because it had been kept secret for them. So that hacker didn't make any money off of doing it. In fact, they got suspended from Twitter. Was it legal to do this necessarily? The jury is out on that, quite literally. But when it comes to these sorts of attacks, a lot of hackers have a lot of sympathy for people who hack for the greater good. But again, as somebody who works at a company that I would get in a lot of trouble for just going out and doing random attacks against companies for the greater good. There are laws here that you need to follow, and when it comes to responsible disclosure and things like that, there's a process for working professionals, and then there's the kind of hacks you see in the news that are very morally ambiguous but get a lot of attention, and those are 2 different conversations, but a very interesting question.
And just for any of you on your corporate network doing some of this stuff, your CISO at your company will not be happy if you start doing some of this. We have these labs in our environment, but our CISO still periodically sends out emails to everybody who can do these types of things and gently reminds them that we've been in very much trouble if we start doing this on our corporate machine or on our corporate network. That's why we have a lab for this. So that you could risk your job or or your freedom potentially if you're not careful with this.
This is true. This is true. I think there was one other question. The question was, can you create honeypots for malware attacks? So this is actually a whole industry of people that will run basically a fake computer that looks vulnerable to a kind of attack that is ongoing. And what they will do is they will log and monitor everybody who's dropping malware samples. And the cat and mouse game here is like the people developing malware want to only drop the minimum amount that they need to in order to figure out if it's a trap or exploit a system that's their target. So they'll build all these conditions into their program to check, like, is this a virtual machine? Is this a honeypot? They'll look for basically, anybody that's not really hiding their tracks to make it look like a real system. But professionals, like companies that do this or researchers that do this, will go through the steps of really simulating, what looks like a vulnerable computer, and they will study all the different things that are dropped onto that virtual machine. And that's how we develop a lot of these antivirus samples. That's how we are able to determine what route these attacks are and start to reverse engineer them, because we need to trick these threat actors into giving us their best exploits and observe the behavior to understand the capabilities. So that's what lots of different malware researchers do. In fact, my friend Marcus, I believe, does this in some cases to understand what kind of exploits are being used and dropped once the initial attack has taken place. So if you want to do that kind of study, I personally am a sick person and love watching logs of people getting stuck in Kippo honeypots. I think it's hilarious to watch baby Linux users try to break into another computer and then end up just getting stuck with a constantly changing file system that won't respond to them. Very, very funny. But honeypots are a really cool and really interesting topic, and they definitely apply to malware and ransomware, because that's how we figure out how these attacks work, because frequently they clean up after themselves so well that there's no other way to really tell what happened.
Yeah, there's a lot too with honeypots. Is you have to kind of have a mission when you go out there. Honeypot is one of many detective controls, but it is not preventative, and it's not. I wouldn't necessarily call it security. It's another alarm to go off. So it could be part of a larger defense in depth strategy, but I'd be careful with putting too many eggs in that basket too, because as Kody mentioned, people, those real sophisticated ones take this into account. So there's a place for it, but be wary, I suppose.
A couple people also recognized I was referring to Malware Tech Blog, Marcus. So yeah, he's actually offered to come on the show before. So if you guys at any point want to talk, maybe ask him some questions about reverse engineering or looking at malware and stuff, yeah, go poke him on Twitter. Maybe he'll come on the show. I would love to have him on Null Byte /SecurityFWD. But cool. I think that we're almost 10 minutes over. I think that's kind of all the questions we can do for today. But
a lot of them.
How about we come back and do another one? We had over 1,000 comments even in the first half of the stream. So you guys seem really active, engaged. These are super fun. And again, we love being able to answer the questions, show some really heavy hitting demonstrations. So if you guys want to see more of these, please make sure to share this. Make sure to subscribe to both the Null Byte and SecurityFWD channel. That's SecurityFWD on YouTube, or you can just go to hackingwithfriends.com and you can check us out every week, 3 times a week, actually 4 times a week now, answering your questions and presenting on various security topics. And we also have some other great guests like Nick from the Null Byte Show come on as well. So make sure to check that out. And Killian, thank you again for coming on and showing us some pretty spooky attacks.
Oh yeah, this was awesome, and thank you all again. I love these questions. Thank you for having me on. Thank you, of course, for the warm reception from the community. This really is the best. Honestly, this is so much fun to come on and be able to talk to everybody. I noticed one comment before we go. Please don't ransomware attack the White House. Please don't do that. I'm telling you right now. I'm not even asking. I'm just saying don't do that. Please don't.
Yeah, that's not for us, that's for you. We'll just get more business if you ransomware the White House, but for you, it's bad for you. Don't do that.
It's bad for everybody. Don't ransomware anybody, please.
As always, be safe, be legal. Do not attack any computers you don't have permission to. This is for educational and industry purposes only. And yeah, thank you guys again for everything in the chat. Thanks to Zam and also the editor at Null Byte, Justin, for letting us go through with this live stream, and Zam for keeping the chat organized. It's been a little bit chaotic in there, but yeah, this has been really fun, and we'll see you again next time. We'll schedule another one of these and let you guys know. So again, share this, make sure to comment on it if you liked it, and we'll do this again sometime. See you next time. Bye.
Take care.